Welcome to Two Beans in a Pod. Today we're digging into one of psychology's really quite unsettling, I think. It's rooted in a pretty infamous study, and it tackles this classic tension between, well, stability and crisis.
Right. We're looking at the intellectual fallout from the Universe 25 experiment. You know, the one where mice were given this supposedly perfect, resource-rich world. And the question it raises is pretty stark. Does having absolute abundance, like no stress at all, this sort of utopia, does that actually lead societies or populations to just collapse?
Or is it the other way around? Is it crisis, maybe scarcity even? That's the thing we actually need? The catalyst for resilience, for beneficial change in society? My position is that hardship, well, it forces human ingenuity, it forces innovation, and the kind of adaptation we need to survive. Basically, struggle builds our long-term strength.
And I'm coming at it from, well, a slightly different angle. I'd argue the data we have from these stress-free environments points towards something dangerous, towards social breakdown, behavioral problems, population collapse, ultimately. It seems when you remove that existential pressure, when necessity disappears, purpose just evaporates. And abundance, in that context, becomes literally deadly. I mean, look at Universe 25. John Calhoun ran it, and it gave us pretty stark empirical evidence, right? This habitat was designed to be perfect. Unlimited food, water, space for nearly 4,000 mice. But the population, it never got near that. It peaked around 2,200 and then just plummeted. Total extinction in, was it just over 3 years?
Okay, I see why you'd point to that, absolutely. But the mechanism of the collapse, that's the crucial part, isn't it? The end didn't come because they ran out of food or water.
No, exactly.
It was a social crisis. Calhoun called it the behavioral sink.
Precisely. They didn't starve. They didn't run out of physical room. It was the social structure itself that just disintegrated because individuals lost any meaningful role. And I think the most telling part was the emergence of the beautiful ones. These mice that, did absolutely nothing but eat, sleep, groom themselves. They completely checked out of mating, defense, any real social interaction. It's not physical death initially. It's what Calhoun called the first death, the death of the spirit. And that happens when necessity, and therefore purpose, just vanish.
It's a powerful image, I grant you. But humans aren't mice in a box. We can't just map the limits of that kind of constrained environment onto our own, vastly more complex societies. As some experts pointed out later, rats may suffer from crowding, human beings can cope. We use creativity, art, intellectual effort to build what Calhoun himself, later on, called spiritual space, even when we're living in physically dense conditions.
But the experiment wasn't just about physical space, was it? It created a physical utopia, sure, but the collapse still happened because arguably they ran out of social space, social roles.
But look at crisis in the human world, though. It often seems to drive necessary, sometimes even positive change. Where's the evidence that humans just withdraw like the mice? I mean, consider the research on humanitarian social enterprises during the start of the COVID pandemic. They faced this incredible sudden crisis, right? Demand doubled, costs tripled almost overnight. That kind of pressure didn't lead to withdrawal. It forced massive social innovation. They had to rely on bricolage, making do, being incredibly creative with whatever limited resources they could scrape together immediately. Crisis can force these institutional resets, break us out of stagnation.
I'm still not entirely convinced that human resilience just magically override what might be a fundamental, maybe biological need for engagement, for purpose. Your focus seems very much on the external pressure, the scarcity. But the mouse utopia collapse, that points inward, doesn't it? To the danger of absolute certainty.
Certainty? How do you mean specifically? How does certainty destroy a society?
Well, the modeling that came out of it, using game theory, suggested the problem was the complete visibility, the rigidity of the dominance hierarchy. In that perfect closed world, any uncertainty about your rank, your place, it just disappeared over generations. Normally, it's that uncertainty, that ambiguity that motivates social action, competing for dominance, reproduction, raising young. If that uncertainty drops to zero, why bother? Why struggle if your exact place is fixed and known? The drive, the motivation, just fades. The whole behavioral system kind of shuts down.
Okay, I can see how uncertainty might motivate ambition. Yes. But an external crisis, like real material scarcity that drives tangible, practical adaptation, it goes beyond individual motivation, I think. Those aid organizations during COVID, they weren't just feeling motivated by uncertainty. They actively leveraged intense, collaborative capabilities. They built dynamic, trust-based relationships with farmers, community partners, precisely to innovate and survive. That shared response, driven by the external threat, creates a dynamic, often positive behavioral shift that's the opposite of the individual withdrawal, the apathy seen in the mice. And this brings it back to sociological theory for me. I tend to think that a singular crisis, a massive external shock like a pandemic, it actually speeds up positive institutional change. It temporarily knocks down the usual primacy of economy and forces what you might call a primacy of politics.
Okay, so you link scarcity to positive change, collective action, but how do you separate that ingenuity from, just sheer desperation? Isn't the exact same pressure that maybe sparks creative bricolage also responsible for, social unrest, hoarding, conflict? We see that in crises throughout history too, right?
That's a fair point about the potential for negative social stress, yes. But often the positive outcome lies in the structural alignment that can follow. Intense pressure can force rapid institutional isomorphism, basically. Organizations, governments, they quickly adopt similar decisive strategies. Think about how fast pandemic protocols spread across different countries, almost in lockstep. That kind of collective, rapid, systemic response, I'd argue, proves resilience. It allows humanity to force necessary path resets on a global scale. Crisis can make us all change together quickly.
But is that forced alignment always healthy? Especially when density and high competition are factors? There's pretty strong evidence from both lab studies and wildlife observations that intense social stress from density actually suppresses reproduction. In Universe 25, the internal social stress, not external lack of resources, led to females neglecting or even attacking their own pups. Infant mortality hit something like 90% during that collapse phase. That seems like a devastating pathological response to internal competition and social breakdown, not some resilient adaptation. You can't just innovate your way out of mothers attacking their babies. Actually, before we jump into the final stretch here, maybe this is a good spot to remind everyone listening, if you're finding this discussion interesting, please do hit the like button and subscribe to Two Beans in a Pod so you don't miss our future analyses of these kinds of complex ideas. So continuing that thought, if we take Universe 25 seriously as a kind of warning, it really suggests that removing all the external challenges, all the constraints, it just shifts the existential threat inward. That death of the spirit, losing purpose beyond just basic survival needs like eating and sleeping, that becomes the main danger. And in that light, maybe utopia, if defined as just absolute, effortless comfort, simply acts as an accelerator for our potentially self-destructive or purposeless tendencies.
That feels, maybe a bit too deterministic for me. The key difference has to be cognitive capacity, right? Rodents, they lack our level of abstract thought, our ability to learn and adapt intellectually. They're maybe more constrained by hardwired social structures. Humans, on the other hand, we demonstrate this high absorptive capacity, the ability to find, assimilate, and critically apply external knowledge to fundamentally change how we operate.
But the mice had knowledge, they knew their place in the hierarchy perfectly, and you said yourself that rigidity, that certainty, killed their engagement.
But that was internal knowledge, and it was fixed, static. Human crises, unlike that mouse utopia, they tend to force profound, species-wide reflection, often involving grappling with new, external knowledge. Think about crises management during the pandemic. It relied heavily on what some sociologists call promissory legitimacy. That's basically the collective agreement to take decisive, often difficult action based on the promise, based on expert knowledge, of preventing an even worse future outcome. This uniquely human capacity for forced innovation, for rapid social realignment driven by shared understanding and future goals, that suggests we can steer away from the kind of behavioral sink that doomed the mice. We adapt, we transform. We don't just withdraw and wait for collapse. So for me, looking at how we handle singular crises really shows that pressure creates, well, massive opportunity. Whether it's humans using collaboration when resources are scarce, or leveraging our unique intellectual capacity during huge disruptions, adaptation gets accelerated by necessity. The struggle itself, I think, is what builds our crucial social capacity and our resilience.
I would still argue, though, that Universe 25 stands as a vital cautionary tale. It strongly suggests that a complete lack of existential challenge, of meaningful struggle, could lead to a kind of behavioral and demographic collapse far deeper, perhaps, than anything caused by just external scarcity. That loss of purpose, the erosion of engagement that seems to happen in perfect abundance, that represents a profound internal threat. And our human intelligence, powerful as it is, might not be enough to overcome it if the fundamental drivers for complex social behavior are completely removed.
So the evidence, the source material here, it really forces us to acknowledge the complex, sometimes contradictory ways that both struggle and, well, peace shape our societies.
Yeah, and it leaves that fundamental question wide open, doesn't it? Does humanity's real success lie in trying to eliminate all hardship? Or is it found in how we meet the next crisis, hopefully with strength we've adapted and learned?
Definitely something to think about. And on that note, don't forget to hit the like button and please subscribe for more deep dives like this one.
Thank you for listening to Two Beans in a Pod.